Greetings. Oh, excuse me. Greetings. I am Gresham's at all. And welcome back to Gresham Reads Monster Blood Tattoo, Book 1, Foundling by D.M. Cornish. So, in the previous chapter, we had seen effectively the aftermath of the Nimble Shrewd's attack on the trio. It is with great fortune that Rosamund had survived, especially with the help of his bothersalts. But he had also... excuse me. I appear to have something stuck in my throat today, and it is quite irritating. But as I was saying, he had used the bother salts that miraculously had dried out enough to be of use once again, in order to scare off any remaining Nimbleshrews that had survived both Licurious and Europe's assault, or return assault on them. Unfortunately, or fortunately in Rosamund's case, Licurious had been overwhelmed by the Nimbleshrews, or Grinlings as the descriptor for the image of them referred to them as. And this caused Europe to lash out, I believe, would be the appropriate term, as she too was overwhelmed, but thankfully, with Rosamund's excellent timing, the Nimbleshrews were driven away, and Europe had collapsed. I just realized I'm giving a synopsis for the ending of 2 chapters ago. But Europe had survived and was complaining about not having her treacle. So she had instructed Rosamund in order to make the treacle, which, according to Europe, after it was done, he had made it near perfectly, if not as it should have been. And this was while he had rushed it as well, which, honestly, I must admit is quite impressive, that he did not make a single mistake, even while hurrying. But with the treacle made, which apparently also had a very dangerous substance known as... where is it? Where is it? Sugar of Nun. Spelled N-N-U-N. So I'm assuming it's Nun. It is something that one of those at the Foundling Crumpollen had warned Rosamund that only individuals up to no good use Sugar of Nun. So the fact that it's in the treacle itself is concerning. But perhaps it reacts differently with the organs within a Fulgar. Perhaps it helps stabilize him. It's difficult to say for sure. But upon consumption of that, the two gathered their supplies and began traveling, and in order to get to a Wayhouse where they could rest and recover. Though when they were nearly there, Europe collapsed and Rosamund was forced to drag her. And eventually they did reach a a Wayhouse by the name of the Harefoot Dig. And that is where we had left off. Was Rosamund seeing the sign? It's quite an interesting name for a place, but either way, let us begin, as always, with the definition provided for us. This one is Wayhouse, which is going to be important for this one, I assume, since it's going to no doubt take place in this Wayhouse. But a Wayhouse is a noun, a small fortress in which travelers can find rest for their souls and safety from the monsters that threaten in the wilds about. The most basic Wayhouse is just a large common room with an attached kitchen and dwelling for the owner and staff, all surrounded by a high wall. Indeed, the common room still forms the center of the Wayhouse, where the stink of dust, sweat, and repellents mingles with the wood smoke and the aromas of the pot. Excuse me. I do not know what is up with my throat today. But let us power through it and let us begin with Chapter 10, at the Harefoot Dig. The entrance of the Harefoot Dig would not open when Rosamund pushed upon it with his shoulder. Undaunted, he carefully laid Europe's feet down. Without quibbling over whether it was polite at so early an hour, he hammered with the wrought knocker of the ironwood gate as loudly as his exhausted arms would allow. Indeed, he could only just lift them to grasp the knocker. Eventually, a round grill high in the gate emitted a gruffly quizzing voice. "What's this here, then? What's your business at this through-dish hour?" It was a strange accent Rosamund had never heard before. A little like Poundinge's, yet different again. It was hard to understand. "I have a friend who's hurt," Rosamund called up to the grill in his deepest, most certain-sounding voice. "We have escaped an attack in the Brindleshaws. We need help." There were slidings, there were scrapings, there was a muffled conversation. "I see," the grill returned eventually. "And what's a scamp like yourself doing up so late? Or so early, if y'all have it at that. In risky places and with no hat on his noggin." Rosamund sighed. "I lost it in the river. Please, sir, my friend is very, very ill and she needs a physician quickly." "Alas, you see, we can't have a sickly lass stuck out there. Stay your ground." One of the gates opened and a short man came out. He was almost as broad across the shoulder as he was tall, and wearing, of all things, a chainmail shirt over the top of long shanks and jackboots. "Let's have a look at her, then," the stocky gatekeeper said as he stepped onto the road. He glanced about with a quick but shrewd eye, then down at the stricken Fulgar. "Blast me, that won't do at all. Pretty lass, too." The stocky gatekeeper picked the Fulgar up under her shoulders, as if her weight was of little consequence. She stirred but little more. He directed an "Oi" over his shoulder. This prompted another person to move out from the shadows of the gateway. It was a woman, a dangerous-looking woman glowering into the dark spaces all about, ready for a fight. She was tall and wore a strange-looking coat of many tails. She looked to the other gator, then at Europe in his arms, and, with no further prompting, stepped over with swaggering grace and took the Fulgar by the ankles. As this woman obediently hefted Europe by her boots, Rosamund saw that the back of her hands were marked with strange brown filigree. It was the quickest glimpse, but it fixed his vague attentions. Monster blood tattoos. She was a monster slayer too. Beneath her left eye was a line of spikes, spores of some unknown profession. Not too gently, they carried Europe through the gate. The short fellow saying over her shoulder, "Here, grab our chattels and all, and follow me. I'm the gator, Teagarden. I look after the gates, see? At your service. What's your name, boy?" "Rosamond," he answered simply as he gathered up Europe's fallen saddlebags. He could barely grip the straps, his hands cramped, neither shut nor open. He was vaguely aware of a brief but pronounced pause. "Oh, your pardon, lass. Mistaked you for the lad in this darkling hour." This Teagarden fellow actually sounded embarrassed. Rosamond did not quite know what to say. His exhausted mind offered no assistance. That's all right. I am a boy." Another pause, even more uncomfortable than the first. The woman bearing Europe's legs gave Rosamond an odd look. Teagarden coughed in a perplexity of even greater embarrassment. "Ah, yes, right you are, and I knows it too, boyo. 'Tis the paucity of lights, methinks, playing tricks. This lass with me be Indolin. She's me fellow gator." Rosamond, too wayworn to care, offered what he hoped was a smile. Behind the gate was a dim, confined coachyard. A yardsman hurried along with the lantern, his feet crunching noisily in gravel. The light was shown in Europe's face while the two gators took her to an entrance in the large low house before them. She still breathed. Rosamond could see her cheeks puffing as he followed closely. However, her skin was a ghastly pale green, showing the deep blue spoor vividly. Good lord, I am stumbling over my words today. I am sorry for that. Great bruised rings sunk beneath each eye, while sweat ran freely from her brow and hair. She was unrecognizable. She was getting worse. The yardsman gasped ever so quietly. "Hoyle be, she's a Lazar." The lady gator seemed to scowl, but continued in her work. Teagarden whistled softly. "'Pon me honor, you'll keep your company strangely, boyo. Still, that's neither here nor there. Get her inside sharply. She looks fit to expire." The door they approached opened, casting an oblong of light on the scene. A lanky man in a maroon powdered jacket and stocking cap stood there, looking tight-faced and beady-eyed. "What is all this huff and scuffle?" he demanded tetchily. "We've got two new arrivals, sir," Teagarden offered respectfully. "And this lass is poorly, physic needingly so, sir. She also be a Lazar, sir, so I think it best we come in through the back ways to avoid raising an unnecessary alarm." "Well, good, Teagarden. No need to wait for my permission, man. If you see a physician is needed." The lanky man, who was obviously of some importance at this establishment, seemed the type to be peeved no matter how he was answered. "Bring them in, man. Bring them in. Don't wait for me to invite you. Hello there, my boy. You look most weary. Welcome to the Harefoot Dig. I am Mr. Billetus, the proprietor. We will do all that we might for your mother, and for yourself, too." Mother? This Mr. Billetus, the proprietor, took Rosamond by the hand and gave it a stiff shake. Europe was carried on within and down a passage of white daub and many doors. It looked very much like a servant's entrance. "Now, fellows," Mr. Billetus continued, "take the boy's poor mother to the left wing, room 12. He addressed Rosamond. "'Tis the only room we have for persons of quality as yourselves. Quality which, if I may be so bold, I can see you have in spades. Will it do?" Rosamund had no idea if the room would or would not do. Any room was as good as far as he thought. Any room would do, sir. I just wanted to be seen by a physic. Excellent, excellent. Of course, certainly. Go on, fellows, Mr. Billetus said, turning to the gaiters and yardsmen. The mother needs seeing to. Get her to her room. Preparto. Teagarden seemed reluctant, but said, Right you are, sir. Yes, Teagarden. Like I said before, sir, she be a Lazar. The proprietor's eyebrows shot up. After a brief reflection, he recovered. Well, I didn't make her that way, man. Money is money. Keep her hidden from my wife for now. What Madame Philistine doesn't know won't hurt us. I'll sort the rest. Off to their rooms now. Now! Holding a pale bright lin, Mr. Billetus led them through the labyrinthine confusion of dark passages and darker doors. A boy joined them, and Mr. Billetus said to him, Aha, little dog. There you are, you scamp. Now hurry in quick to Dr. Verhoeven's estate, and bring the good physician back with you. No dawdling. Lives are in the balance. Despite his fatigue, Rosamund thought it mightily untoward to send such a little fellow out while it was still dark. Little dog did not seem happy about it either. Nevertheless, he dashed off stoutly. The physician should be here within the hour, Mr. Billetus said with open satisfaction. Good, good. To your rooms we go. Mr. Billetus stopped by a door and looked at Rosamund just as a cat might coolly regard an agile mouse. You, can afford these lodgings, can't you? Rosamund's heart skipped a beat. He thought on the expensive foods and fine upholsteries in the landlot, all of Europe's flaunted wealth, and declared, with a quick-witted rattle of his own purse, absolutely. Billetus looked powerfully relieved. Wonderful. So you wouldn't object to settling a portion of your board in advance, then? No. The Foundling hoped he was doing the right thing. Good, good. One night's billet, board, and attendance from a room of such elegance, and I do believe, by the cut of your clothes, the elegance is in order. The board for such a room is 6 sequins, paid in advance for 2 nights. If you leave after the first night, then we'll happily reimburse you. So you should count this as your first night, since indeed it is not over yet. And say, with a carlin and a tuck, that you will be paid up to the morning of tomorrow night. Agreed? Rosamund's overtaxed mind cogitated the sums. That's 20 guys to a sequin and 16 sequins to a so. So 2 lots of 6 sequins was 12 sequins. A carlin is a 10 sequin piece, and a tuck is a 2 sequin piece. 10 and 2 makes 12, 12 sequins again. I reckon it's right. Sure is a lot, though. He thought his head might burst. I think. Thank you. Excuse me. Mr. Billetus held out his free hand, palm uppermost. Rosamund looked at it dumbly for a while, then realized the proprietor was wanting payment now. The Foundling fingered about in his purse, finding only the gold Emperor's billion coin he'd received on entering the lamplighter service, 3 sequins and a Guy's coin. He frowned, thought for a moment, and then handed the gold billion to Billetus. The proprietor looked down at his payment with astonishment. Does... Rosamund's voice caught in his throat. Does that cover it? It's a little irregular, but yes, it's certainly legal tender and covers the fare amply. It will even buy you breakfast in the morning, for the mornings. Billetus pocketed the coin while he opened the door. The room beyond was large and of a luxury the Foundling did not think possible. There were 2 beds, their highly decorative heads against one wall, billowing linen and airdowns of the softest cotton. The floor was wooden boards polished till they were slick, the white walls and high ceiling richly decorated with flutes and twirls, made buttery yellow in the lantern's glow. In the Foundlingery, a room of this size would have been used to bunk 20, where this was meant for just 2. Europe was being laid on the farther bed as Rosamund the proprietor entered. A worn-looking blanket, looking out of place in its fine surroundings, was stretched upon this bed to stop the coverlets from being ruined by the Fulgar's travel-grind gear. A maid, 2 tubs, and several pitchers of steaming water arrived. Mr. Billetus excused himself and Rosamund bathed behind a screen while the maid attended to Europe behind another. He almost fell asleep in the tub, but the maid, finished with her attentions to the Fulgar, woke him with an impatient cough. Before too long, he was clean, cleaner than he had ever felt in his whole life, dressed in a nightgown and lying in a bed, the very softness of which swallowed him whole. Europe lay, much like he, bathed and in her bed, in a borrowed nightgown. Is she better? Rosamund managed, vaguely aware that the maid was hovering about doing who knows what. She fares as well as she may, considering. She hushed. You can sleep, little boy. Her state won't change just on your attentions. Lamps were doused. The maid left. In the dimness of the growing dawn, Rosamund watched the feverish Europe. He could not tell when or how, but in that soft, warm bed of the smoothest cotton, sleep finally took him. He awoke with a deep fright, released at last from churning nightmares of Licurious's bloody end. The room was too white, too bright, the ceiling too florid, and the bed too strange. Then he realized where he was. Rosamund was beginning to tire of waking in strange places. Some comfort it was that the bed was so soft and so warm. He stretched luxuriously, wrapped in its wholly unfamiliar feeling, then sat up and looked about. There was a tall window at the far end, its 2 panes flung open, letting in cold air and the bird song of late afternoon that had brought him to reality. The world beyond it, of straight trunks and bare, tangled twigs, was wintry, but golden with afternoon sun. The choir of birds, the soft, insistent cooing of some type of pigeon, the twitter-twitter of many small beaks, and an unusual call going warble, 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 chortle, was strangely loud and altogether foreign. The room itself was empty, inasmuch as there was no one else walking about in it. However, the bed near him on his left, before that open window, was occupied. In it, of course, lay Europe. He clambered out of his own and went to her side. She lay on her back, her head cushioned upon many marshmallowy pillows, the covers tucked right up under her chin. Her long hair had been gathered under a maid's cap, just like one Verlaine would wear. Shivering as cold air blew in through the open window, bringing with it the smell of mown grass, he reached out, touching her smooth forehead with his forefinger. The Fulgar did not stir. She felt cool now, in contrast to the feverish heat she had boiled with so recently. His curiosity mastering him, Rosamund cautiously stroked her spoor, the small diamond drawn so neatly above her left eye. Every side was straight and of equal length, the corners clear points, its bottom just meeting the hair of the brow. He had heard, he could not remember whether it was from Francois or somewhere else, these spores were made by using some acidic substance which left a permanent yet somehow scarless brand. Why anyone would want to do something to themselves that sounded so painful was very puzzling. Was it just vanity, or was it a warning? As far as he was concerned, the next time he saw a mark like this upon someone, he would be very wary of them. He stared at her blank, sickly face, hugging himself in the insufficient warmth of the borrowed nightgown, rubbing one foot against the opposite shin, and then reverse, to relieve the chill of the floorboards. Suddenly, he decided it was time to be dressed. He found his clothes in the cupboard, cleaned and pressed. Everything was there but his shoes. Rosamund got dressed, searching quietly all about the room as he did. Where are those shoes? Under his bed? No. Under Europe's bed? No. They were not in his closet, so he went to the one that held Europe's effects. The clothes had been washed too, and the cupboard was filled with the odor of aromatics used to clean them. With this hung a sharp, honey-like scent he was beginning to recognize as Europe's own. He was sure he was doing something quite rude by even thinking of looking through the Fulgar's belongings. He closed the closet quickly. The door at the farther end of the room, of a wood so dark as to appear black, opened. In breezed a maid with a flurry of swishing skirts. When she saw Rosamund standing by the Fulgar's bed, she seemed uncertain. She curtsied expertly, despite her burdens. I brought the doctor to see you, young master. And we have an image on the next page of Dr. Verhoeven. Rosamund ducked his head shyly. A very serious and surprisingly young man entered the room. He was richly attired in a wonderfully patterned frock coat, flat-heeled buckled shoes known as mules, and a great white wig that stuck high in the air and left a faint puff of powder behind it. This is Dr. Verhoeven, our physician, the maid said, indicating the young man with a tray she carried. A tray holding 2 bowls of pumpkin soup that smelled so delicious, Rosamund was immediately distracted by it. And this doctor is Rosamund, said the Foundling matter-of-factly. Ah, right you are, my boy, Dr. Verhoeven squinting at him. Said Dr. Verhoeven squinting at him. Delighted. How are you feeling? Good, thank you. As it should be. I want you to have some of this soup that Gretel has kindly brought you, the doctor said as the maid placed the 2 bowls on a small table by the fire with a simpering blush. I have fortified it with one of my personal restorative drafts, so it will see you righter than ever. He half turned to the maid. You may leave now, Gretel. If there is anything, if I need anything, you will be the first to know. The maid ducked her head, grinned at Rosamund, and left again. Dr. Verhoeven ambled over to the sickbed, hands behind his back. He stood over the unconscious Lazar and walked back and forth on his heels. He checked the pulse in her neck, felt the temperature of her forehead, hummed a lot, and scrutinized her closely through a strange-looking monocle. Rosamund sipped at his soup, which right then was about the sweetest thing he had ever had, and watched Dr. Verhoeven watching Europe. At length, the doctor turned his shrewd attention to the boy. She is not your mother, is she, child? About to help himself to a mouthful of wonderful soup, Rosamund stopped with a slight sputter and fidgeted. No, sir. I never actually said that she was, though. Others did. How did you... Dr. Verhoeven adjusted his monocle. How did I know, you were about to ask? Because you've got the Brandon Rose here, my boy. Heroic teratologist, infamous bachelorette, and terror to the male of our species. She is not, if reputation serves, the mothering type. How, by the precious here and there, did you come by her? The Brandon Rose. That name was familiar to Rosamund, though he could not remember why. Perhaps he had read just such a name in one of his pamphlets? What a remarkable thing that would be to have fallen in with someone famous. He hung his head, feeling strangely uncomfortable. She saved me from a thirsty end. Will she get better? She ought to, child, with my skillful ministrations. I've been here since early this morning. You slept, my boy, while I scraped away the necrotic tissue and stitched that nasty gash about her throat. I've also balanced her humors and bled her a little against the disease of the wound. The only thing she needs now is that awful stuff her kind takes. Plaudimentum, I believe it's called. I've sent out word for a local skull to be found so it can be made. From my readings, which have by no means been extensive, a Lazar cannot go terribly long without it. 2 or 3 days at most, or things begin to go sour within. The physician rolled his eyes dramatically. But how now? I need not frighten you with such detail. Unfortunately, he had frightened Rosamond, though probably not in the way he had expected. Filled with urgency, the boy stood. Do you mean her treacle, sir? Aha! That's the one. Cathar's treacle. Just the stuff. When did she last have any? Some last night, but I don't know when exactly though. But I can brew it for her now, sir. I don't want her innards to go sour, and she's got all the makings. The physician looked dubious. I made it for her the other night, Rosamund insisted. If I've done it before, I can do it again. The confidence in his own voice surprised him. Are you her factotum? You seem to me to be a little young for it. Dr. Verhoeven tapped at his mouth with his forefinger, eyebrows wriggling inquisitively. No, sir, I'm not. Sometimes Rosamund almost regretted he found it so hard to lie. No? Ah, we shall wait for this other to arrive then, shall we? She's a skald, and I am of the understanding that she knows how to make such a concoction. The physician took a high-backed chair from a corner and sat down on it by the fire. But why does she need it so badly? A good question, my boy. A good question. Are you sure you want the answer? Dr. Verhoeven looked very much as if he wanted to give it. Rosamund indicated that he did want the answer. Of course he would. Well, you see, as I have read, when someone wants to become a Lazar, they usually take themselves off to a gloomy little city in the far south called Sinister. In that place there are butchers, surgeons, they insist on calling themselves, who will carve you up for a high fee. Are you following me? Rosamund nodded quickly. As you should. As you should. So, having gone this far, so the readings report, these surgeons take whole systems of exotic glands, bladders, vessels, and viscera and sew them right in with all the existing entrails and nerves. Some say these new glands and such are grown just for just this purpose, while others hold that they are harvested from other creatures. No one agrees, and the surgeons of Sinister aren't telling. Either way, when it is all done, the person is stitched back up again. Now, here comes the answer to your question. All these strange and exotic glands are wrong for the body. Consequently, it reacts, eventually most violently, unless something is done to stop such a thing. That is the job of the Plaudimentum, the Cathar's treacle. Do you understand? They have to spend the rest of their lives taking this stuff every day to stop their natural organs from revolting against these introduced ones. This morbidity, this organ decay, once it takes hold, will eventually prove fatal. If this lady doesn't get hers soon, she will die. How now? I think you'll find that covers it anyway. Yes? As Rosamund took a breath to answer, he was distracted by an animated, angry-sounding conversation approaching the other side of the door that was then interrupted by a sharp knocking. Dr. Verhoeven stood at this and called mildly, "Enter, please." The door was opened rapidly and a strange woman stalked in, wearing the elegant day clothes of a refined lady, and on her face a frown of politely restrained anger. Closely behind followed Mr. Billetus, looking worried and chattering nervously even as they entered. "Now, dearest, one's guest money is as good as another's. With these knickers making the high vesting way impassable, you know our visitors have been few. Every bit of custom is needful, dear. Yes, Master Bill. Not in front of those who do not need to be troubled with the finer points of running such a grand establishment. Good afternoon, Dr. Verhoeven." The woman grimaced at the physician in a mockery of a polite smile. He, in turn, bowed graciously, a puff of powder coming from his wig. She put her attention on Rosamund and said stiffly, "And you must be the smaller of our most recent arrivals. I am Madame Felicitine, the Enrica de Arma of this humble yet refined Wayhouse." As she said refined, she looked sharply at Mr. Billetus. I keep saying Billetus, but it's Billetus, not Billetus. I'm getting the I and the E mixed up. Confused, Rosamund simply stood blinking. Enrica de Arma was a fancy term for the ruling lady of a household, especially of a court. It was only used by those trying to be very grand. "It has come to my notice," that Enrica de Arma continued, addressing the physician, yet pointing angrily at the inert Fulgur, "that we have here, in one of our finest apartments, a pugnator, one of the fighting riffraff. Is this true, sir?" "Yes, gracious madame, it is, though to me calling her is of little concern. I heal all comers. Don't try to charm me, doctor. You share in this little sham of my husband's. Though how you thought I would not know what was up soon enough is insulting at the least." She gave the harassed Billetus another quick glare. He offered an apologetic look to both Rosamund and Dr. Verhoeven, but did little else. To Rosamund, the scene was becoming very strange and uncomfortable. Dr. Verhoeven looked bemused. "I assure you, madame, that I am not aware of any sham so as to have a part in it to play. I have come as asked to tend to an ailing guest. This is not the first time I have done this, as you well know." He finished his statement with a gracious half-bow. "Certainly not, but this is the first time you have invited here another almost as bad." She turned to the door and called, "You may enter now, Gretel." Gretel the maid came in as bidden, looking sheepishly at her mistress. Closely behind her shuffled a stranger, a short, meek-looking young woman. A girl, really, younger than Verlaine, wearing a variation of clothing Rosamund had seen many times before, a scold. Upon her head was a conical hat of black felt that bent back slightly about a third of the way up. All scolds wore some style of cylindrical or conical headwear as a sign of their trade. About her throat and shoulders was the cape of white hemp with thick gathered collar that scolds pulled over their faces to protect themselves from the fumes of their potives. Upon her body she wore a vest called a quabard, light-proofing Rosamund had seen in the uniforms of the light infantry of Boschenberg. One side was black and the other brown, the model of her Gotenbosch, just like Rosamund's baldric. About her stomach, over the top of the carbard, was wrapped in forgive me, my brain seems to be stalling for a bit. Sorry. About her hips, let's see, a broad swath of black satin tied at the small of her back in a great bow. About her hips hung cylinders, boxes, wallets, and satchels, most certainly holding reagents and potives and everything else skulls used in their fight against the monsters. Her sleeves were long and brown and flaring. Her wide skirt of starched brown muslin was also long, and it dragged upon the ground, hiding her feet. Her black doe-skin gloved hands were clasping and unclasping uncertainly in front of her. He had already seen several skulls in his life, for many served at Boschenberg's docks to ward off any knickers that might rise out of the humor and along the city's walls. Even so, Rosamund knew less now about them than he did Fulgar's. What he did know was what everyone knew, that they made all kinds of potions and draughts even more powerful and fabulous than those concocted by Crampolin and other dispensarists, who were more concerned with health and healing. The chemistry of a skull, however, was designed for harm and violence. He knew that they had served in the Empire's monster fighters, pugnators, Europe had called them, for centuries before the advent of the Lazars. This young lady must have been the skull Dr. Verhoeven had mentioned, the one to make Europe's treacle for her. For a pugnator, she seemed very nervous. With a look of triumph, Madame Felicitine returned her attention to the physician. "Dr. Verhoeven," she demanded, "what business have you inviting such knavish individuals into my peaceful establishment? You know my delicate sensibilities won't tolerate such liberties, nor will they suffer the presence of such as these." She pointed a bigoted finger at the skull, whose face reddened. The physician looked very ill at ease. "Dear wife," Billetus ventured bravely, forgetting her warning on saying things in front of those who did not need to know, "their accounts is well paid. There have been no real trouble, rather quiet in fact, as needs must. What possible harm is one hard-working, well-paying Lazar occupying a room she and her factotum can afford?" The Enrica de Alma's thin line of civility failed her at last. "Oh, frogs and toads, because of the principle! She cannot please," the physician interjected in a low, insistent voice. "You'll wake her." Madame Felicitine eyed him coldly, but continued with deliberate calm. "She cannot stay here, because if guests of genuine refinement were to learn that a person of violence and infamy was bunked in the suite next door, they would never return and advise others to do the same. I will not have this. Oh no." With a dark look at Dr. Verhoeven, she forced herself to be collected again. No. The billet boxes are the place for her, though I prefer the servant stalls for the likes of these, if they must stay here at all." She then looked gravely at Rosamund, who was looking very grave himself. "Now, it pains me, child, it truly does, but things must have their right place and order. People have their rank and station, and some should not assert themselves above their betters. I know you'll understand one day." Wow, so this woman is an elitist. I see. What a fool. Now, dear. Her momentum building, the Enrica de Arme went on. "That is quite enough from you, I would say. You who let her," the accusing finger now stabbed at Europe, unconscious on the bed, "stay here." Her arms now gestured wildly at the whole room. She began to go pale, her cheeks wobbling apoplectically. "Did you think I wouldn't find out? She simply has to go." Mr. Billetus now fumbled and stumbled, but offered very little else. Oh, my busting knees. Keep her in the billet box if your tender heart won't allow eviction. The Enrica de Arma hissed. Either way, get her out of this room. In the awful echoing silence that followed came a soft, icy voice. My money glitters as well as another's, madame. And here in this bed, I will stay. Everyone looked in wonder to the bed where Europe had lain apparently senseless just moments before. She was still tucked in, her head still half buried in the midst of the many too soft pillows. But her eyes were open now, bloodshot and baleful, and regarding Madame Felicitine with cold disdain. Unexpected relief burst within Rosamond. At last, Europe had awoken. And that is the end of the chapter. I must admit, it is apparent that the woman is only caring for less the money and more of her stance in things. Meanwhile, the husband seems to be the gentler hearted of the two. But either way, come on, you need to hurry it up. No, sorry about that. If you enjoyed this chapter, feel free to leave a like and comment your opinions on it, and what you expect will happen in the next chapter. And also make sure to subscribe and ring the notification bell to be alerted whenever a new video goes up on the channel or when Darkest goes live. In the meantime, I will see you all in the next video, and in the next chapter, I am Gresham's et al., and I do hope you have a pleasant day.